Good morning. Good morning. My name is Nora Mulligan, and I am your worship associate this morning. Please rise in body and or spirit and join in singing hymn number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth, in the Gray Hymnal.
Good morning. My name is Jim Russell, and I am the Secretary for the Board of Trustees. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley. Whether you have been with this congregation a decade or more, or this is your first time visiting, we welcome you. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, we welcome you. Whatever your theological stance, we welcome you. Whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. Whatever your heritage, we welcome you. We respectfully acknowledge the territory on which our church building sits as the ancestral homeland of the Munsee, Lenape, and Wappinger people. I have a couple of announcements this morning. We are in week 3 of our annual pledge drive, which ends on March 13th. Please send those pledges to Megan and Chris Fenton so they won't have to call you. Our ability to plan our budget for next year depends on your pledges. This morning, we're just about at the $77,000 mark. We have a ways to go. Secondly, mark your calendar to attend one of the 3 small group gatherings in early March to determine our next steps. An evening Zoom session will be on March 10th, an in-person session on Saturday morning in Fellowship Hall on March 12th, and an afternoon Zoom session on Monday, March 14th. For the most up-to-date information, please refer to our weekly e-newsletter and check our website frequently. The website is also the place where you can find contact information for our staff, Board of Trustees, and other congregational leaders. And please join us for conversation after the service. If you are present in the sanctuary, feel free to stay right here. If you're watching live stream, the link for the Zoom coffee hour can be found in the Saturday reminder in your email and on our website. If you are just recently joining us and would like to receive our weekly e-news, please email us with your name and we will make sure you are added to our e-news list. We can also answer any questions you might have. Email us at uucroton@gmail.com or fill out one of the yellow cards in the back of the pews and drop it in the collection plate. Please silence your cell phones at this time if you're here in the sanctuary. Once again, we welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Hudson Valley.
Our lives are made up of moments that somehow, though small, become significant. Sharing a meal with friends, giving help to a child, listening to a person and being listened to, talking with another about something that makes us sad, an embrace, a smile, a touch, offering a thought that maybe will help just a little to make more sense of it all. Our gathering in fellowship is such a small moment in each of our lives. It is a small thing we do in gathering, yet somehow it is significant. May we affirm and celebrate these small moments that this morning we together share.
Our chalice lighting words this morning are from Tim Haley. We light our chalice this morning as a symbol of the eternal energy and creativity that burns and moves in our universe, that brings to us and all creatures change, transformation, and renewal. May we feel the heat of this eternal flame in our hearts today. Now please join me in saying our Unison Affirmation. The words are in your order of service. Inspired by love, our mission is to seek our true nature, connect deeply and openly, and act for justice. Let us now bear witness to the joys and sorrows experienced in this community. If you have a personally significant joy or sorrow that you're willing to share, please come up to this microphone. If you would prefer to only have a candle lit without speaking, just stand or raise your hand and I will light a candle for you. I'll go first. It is with sorrow that I see what's going on in the Ukraine, and we stand with all people who are fighting against injustice and authoritarianism.
This is going to end really well. Get ready. My name is Kathy Clark. I checked this morning. It was 2008 that I started here. And I remember one of my friends saying, because I can feel tears coming, "Oh, Kathy, sometimes you just need to cry." That's about when I would come to church. Well, I've known you all a really long time, and I decided I'm not going to worry about how this is going to come out. It's been a really rough week in my household. My partner Dan's parents left Ukraine. They're not with us anymore. They passed years ago. His kids grew up with Ukrainian school, and he's got cousins there, and we're very worried about him. But get ready for the switch. So yesterday, Dan and I, though, got to go and tell my mother, who's 84, she wouldn't want me to say, that we have decided we're going to get married. Thank you, and I just want to say, love wins, and so even though I'm not comfortable being up here, I wanted you guys to know, too, because I'm actually shaking. I didn't know I shook. That I actually really love you guys, too, and, I've known you all a long time, so yay, love.
Good morning. I think a lot of you know my daughter Pam Brigleb. She hasn't been here for a while. She's in graduate school now. So what I'm announcing today is that 13 weeks from today, she's getting married in Butler, Pennsylvania. And I think a lot of you will remember Reverend Thixton is going to be officiating. Oh, that's so great.
About 8.5 years ago, my mother died, and during that whole process, my brother got mad at me and has not talked to me since. But because of this other family sad thing, he's actually coming up tonight to have dinner with me. So I'm really hoping that this will be like a new phase in our relationship, because I really need him. So thank you.
A couple of joys and sorrows that got emailed to me ahead of time. Michael Schwartz, also sorrow about the invasion of Ukraine, noting that his grandfather was born near the Ukrainian border, and he has a lot of fond memories of that area. And Pat Krugman, a joy for Scrabble games with Al Raymond. She did not indicate whether or not she wins or not, but apparently just enjoying the game of Scrabble.
I'm lighting a candle for all the joys and sorrows that we keep in the sanctuary of our hearts. And a candle for all the people who have not found someone yet, a place yet where they can share their joys and sorrows.
I invite you now to join in the spirit of meditation. You may wish to do so by sitting up a bit straighter in your chair or your pew. Put your feet on the floor. Close your eyes if you wish, or leave them just slightly open. And slowly take in a nice deep breath and gently release it, releasing all of the stress of the week. Human beings are communal by nature, and our primitive ancestors created tribal structure to protect its members from outside influences that could threaten the safety of the family or the clan. We were suspicious of outsiders, anyone that was different than we were, afraid of the unknown, quick to attack others unlike ourselves. Our communities were built to exclude anyone who wasn't like us. Unfortunately, this behavior didn't just disappear as our societies began to evolve to include an increasingly diverse population. Being fearful and intolerant of people unlike us continues to live on in the more primitive parts of our nervous system, and at times all it needs is a stressful situation for it to express itself in our thoughts, speech, and actions. What's the answer then? How can we transcend our old, antiquated, fear-based, discriminatory, and intolerant behavior? In a world that seems poised on the brink of the next confrontation, what can we each do to usher more peace, compassion, acceptance, harmony, equality, and love? In a word, meditate. Let us be together then in a moment of silent meditation.
Our reading today is from How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, talking about the Florida recount following the 2000 election. Reporters and campaign officials seemed more focused on Floridians whose votes were not counted or counted the wrong way. Palm Beach County used confusing ballots that caused about 19,000 spoiled ballots and perhaps 3,000 Gore voters to mistakenly vote for Pat Buchanan. Gadsden County, next to Tallahassee, had Florida's highest percentage of black voters and the highest spoilage rate. Blacks were 10 times more likely than whites to have their ballots rejected. The racial inequality could not be explained by income or educational levels or bad ballot design, according to a New York Times statistical analysis. That left one explanation. One that at first I could not readily admit: racism. A total of 179,855 ballots were invalidated by Florida officials in a race ultimately won by 537. A 29-year-old Ted Cruz served on Bush's legal team that revisited efforts at manual recounts in Democratic counties that could have netted Gore tens of thousands of votes, while pushing for manual recounts in Republican counties that netted Bush 185 additional votes. Watching this horror flick unfold, I recoiled in fear for days after the election, but not some of my peers at Florida A&M University. They amassed the courage I did not have, that all anti-racists must have. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to do what is right in the face of it, as the anonymous philosopher tells us. Some of us are restrained by fear of what could happen to us if we resist. In our naivete, we are less fearful of what could happen to us, or is already happening to us, if we don't resist. Please join me for hymn number 47 in the gray hymnal, Now on Land and Sea Descending.
Now, before Black History Month comes to a close, I wanted to share some of my struggles and learning around race. I was struck by how personal Ibram X. Zendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, was. And Jane told me this week that the kids are actually working with this book too. So we're very holistic this Sunday with our kids learning about the same thing the adults are. I was so inspired by his candor and his example that I wanted to share 3 anecdotes that happened to me at various ages, all regarding race and racism. During my childhood, my paternal grandfather was a very intimidating figure. He was a large man, and I was the first grandchild. He didn't know how to talk to kids. And it didn't help that his normal speaking voice came off pretty close to a shout, so that you thought he was yelling at you even when he was just having kind of a casual conversation. So pretty scary for a kid. However, as I entered young adulthood, my grandfather started to relate to me a little bit more as an adult. Or perhaps I was becoming an adult and had a broader context for his behavior than what I did when I was little. At any rate, one day we found ourselves sharing the back seat of a car that was taking us from a restaurant where we had had lunch to my father's house. And my grandfather was rather old by this point. They didn't let him drive as much as he would have liked, I think. At any rate, this particular day felt special, having not grown up particularly close to my grandfather. This was a day when we had, at lunch, had some grown-up conversations. He shared some of his life with me about being a farmer. And as we rode around town in the back seat, he showed a rare sign of affection. He took his hand off his cane and placed it on my knee. Now, my grandfather was German, so this was practically downright effusive for him. I was so happy and felt so loved that, well, that is until he started to speak. I'm not sure what prompted the comment about immigrants. It might have been a report on the radio, it might have been something said up in the front seat by one of my parents, but whatever it was, this comment received some heavy-duty response from my grandfather. He went off on how immigrants are taking our jobs, how they shouldn't be allowed into our country, yada, yada, yada. You know the whole yarn by now. But before Donald Trump made these racist comments tropes of our political discourse, my grandfather was ahead of his time. But as I say, I hadn't really heard talk like this too much before. I was shocked and aghast. Had I been wearing pearls at the time, I would have grasped them for sure. Now, mind you, he still had his hand on my knee when this sweet moment of grandfatherly affection was happening while he's going off on this racist rant against Hispanics and other people who came into our country. It was a little sickening and definitely spoiled what should have been a rare moment of tenderness between us. Instead, I remember that day mostly as the moment when I realized just how racist some of my relatives are. Racism is a concept that can get confusing in some circumstances. There's a lot of ideas about race out there. Some of them are racist, some of them are anti-racist. Some of them are ideas that masquerade as non-racist, but really are kind of a smokescreen for racism. It is super confusing these days. Fortunately, in that book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram Kendi gives us lots of definitions. In fact, he starts off every chapter of his book with 1 or 2 and sometimes 3 key definitions that he will kind of unpack as the chapter continues. The most basic one is racist. He defines that as One who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing a racist idea. Conversely, an anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing an anti-racist idea. He goes on to say that a racist idea is an idea that promotes or leads to inequality among people of race, and anti-racist ideas lead to equality, or at least to less inequality between people of different races. What I find intriguing about this definition is that it's based on behavior. What you do and say can lead to equality or inequality between people. It is a consequence of your actions. It is not based on your identity. So black people can have racist ideas so long as those ideas lead to inequality. Indeed, Kendi, who is himself African American, shares a great deal of himself in this book. He frames his book through kind of a series of autobiographical vignettes. And he points out times when he himself had racist ideas, racist assumptions, even whole speeches that won debating prizes. Now, obviously, he has a lot of anti-racist ideas too, but his point is that you can be a racist and an anti-racist based on your behavior. Sometimes you might be one, other times you might be the other. It's all about what you do that matters. One doesn't normally think of physics class as the place where you will encounter racism, but I did. In my high school, physics was kind of the pinnacle of your high school science education. Usually in your senior year, you dreaded having the class underneath the physics lab, which was on the second floor. If you were in that class underneath, all you heard all day long was the thud of students dropping and bouncing large objects on the floor in order to learn about gravity. Normally, that was the height of excitement in an otherwise dreary class. That is, unless you had my lab partner, Doug. Now, for those of you who may not realize it, I grew up in a small town in Michigan, and it was in a small high school. And like most of my classmates, I had known Doug ever since we were in elementary school. I had been in the same room with this guy in one way or another for most of my life. Today in physics class, he happened to be sitting next to me, and we wound up working on the project at hand in class. Again, I don't remember what started or triggered the comment. I believe one of our Hispanic classmates walked by. That's what I remember. Somehow and in some way, Doug had a beef with this fellow. Now again, let me emphasize, this was not a stranger. It was Pedro, whom I had known for most of our high school career, the last 4 or 5 years. All I knew is that one moment I'm trying to work out the math for a physics problem, and the next moment my lab partner is in a shouting match with Pedro in the middle of physics class. Again, this small town I grew up in was mostly white. However, there were a few African American folks, but many more Latinos. You didn't have to go far out of town in this sleepy little burb in southeast Michigan before you were in some pretty rural environments. Most of my ancestors, including my grandfather, had been farmers working that land, and they weren't the only ones. I look up to see Doug shouting to Pedro about migrant workers. Now, this wasn't the quiet whisper among middle-class, upper-class white folks who inadvertently maybe say the wrong thing. No, this was full-on, in-your-face, not trying to be subtle or hidden about it, racism. Needless to say, Pedro nearly decked him right there in class. They went chest to chest right in front of me. It was only for the timely intervention of the teacher who separated them that a full-on fist fight did not ensue. Now, I was very grateful for the teacher for stopping this fight before I even know what was going on. Of course, I'd also point out that neither student received a reprimand for their actions, nor did anyone get in trouble. Back then, apparently, you could get away with racist statements, have nothing happen to you. Lack of accountability for white people was astonishing in retrospect. Now again, I was shocked. I knew what racism was at this point. I knew that it wasn't a good thing, and that what Doug had said to Pedro right to his face was incredibly inappropriate. It was scary and it was mean. And I knew then and there that I would avoid talking about race at nearly any cost. Yes, that is a privilege I have as a white person. I can ignore, if I want to, people, the topic of racism. People of color do not have that as an option. But I was acting out of fear. I've come to understand fear as one of the most important spiritual challenges that I face. Whenever I'm afraid, I know that there's something going on inside me that I need to look at. Fear is a kind of meditation bell that rings in our minds. It calls us back to ourselves, to pay attention to those places where we might be anxious, tense, or angry. Now, I won't pretend to speak for anyone else, black or white, because I'm not privy to the thoughts and feelings that go on through another's heart and mind, but I do know what goes on through mine when I am afraid. One thing that happened as a result of this incident in physics class was that I did not want to talk about race. It was confusing and it was scary. I might say the wrong thing to the wrong person and they could get mad at me. Or even worse, accuse me of being an actual racist when I was not. As I say, this was my thinking at the time. I was coming out of that experience nearly witnessing a fight based on nothing more than racial hatred. The last thing I ever wanted was to be accused of being a racist. And so I didn't engage with it. Kendi calls this non-racism, assuming you've overcome race by ignoring, sometimes willfully so, racist or racial issues. But this is just a form of denial, really. I had not overcome anything. I was just hiding from one of the harsh realities of life because being a middle-class white male, I could. It was painful. I didn't like the experience of thinking of myself as a racist, and I sure didn't like the idea of someone else thinking that I might be. So I chose instead to live in fear. Fear that the topic of race might come up and that I would be on the wrong side of it, unintentionally, of course. Now we know that denial and avoidance are not helpful tools in defeating the enemy that is fear. While it didn't have anything to do with race in particular, this past week, fear has been a companion for most of us. With Vladimir Putin's invasion of an attack on the Ukraine, the possibility of war emerged this week. And I don't know about you, but war is not something I relish. I had to turn in my selective service card 2 days after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. While the Gulf War, in that case, was over very quickly, I didn't know that at the time. And the tension and the fear I experienced when I was 18 came back to me again this week. It was the same fear and the same tension I remember from 2003 when airstrikes began on Baghdad. It was the sense that this was not going to go well. And while I have no idea how things will play out on the geopolitical stage, I do know this. The only way to conquer fear is to face it down. It wants to be ignored so that it can come back twice as strong when you least expect it. When it comes to fear, the only way out is through. My third story. When I was a freshman in college at the University of Michigan, I had the chance to hear Spike Lee give a lecture. Now, this was a public lecture, not part of any class that I was formally a part of. I think they said that Spike Lee was going to talk about the challenges facing African Americans today, this today being the early 90s. And I wasn't particularly interested in that part of it. The topic sounded kind of one of those topics that sound intentionally vague. As someone who writes sermon descriptions, I know this. Sort of a catch-all for whatever Spike's going to talk about that night. I was, and continue to be, a huge Spike Lee fan. Do the Right Thing was one of the best movies I had seen the previous year. I even liked Mo Better Blues, despite its poor critical reception. And I wasn't too interested, really, in racism or the challenges facing African American people. I was a movie fanboy, but that was about to change very abruptly. Now, at the time that this lecture was taking place, Spike Lee had just finished shooting Malcolm X, the biopic about the civil rights leader, and he shared what he had learned about Malcolm X, who clearly was and is one of Spike Lee's heroes. He talked about Malcolm X's spiritual journey and conversion to Orthodox Islam. He talked about going to different African American leaders like Michael Jordan and Oprah and Bill Cosby to get financing for his movie when some studios were not giving him the budget he needed. And I kind of identified with that spiritual journey that he talked about with Malcolm X, and that restlessness of the soul that is willing to follow the callings of the Spirit wherever it may lead. And along the way, while he was talking, I learned a lot about the challenges facing African American people at the time. In fact, that was just what I needed. Ever since that ugly incident between Doug and Pedro in physics class, I had managed to avoid talking about or even thinking very deeply about race. Now, it had been laid before me by a person whose opinion I valued and respected. I could not ignore it. This was the first time, and by no means the last time, when I would be woke to the problems and the lack of clear solutions to the challenges facing African American folks. I remember going back to my dorm and pacing back and forth underneath my loft. I was talking to myself, trying to kind of process what I had heard and what I had learned. And I knew that I had to get over the fear that I had around race. I had to learn more about it. Like Kendi's realization in our reading this morning when he sees the courage of his classmates in responding to racism. I saw that anti-racism required courage, real courage, to act in the face of my personal fear. The result is that I joined the multicultural organization in my dorm. It was called Cameo, though for the life of me I couldn't remember what the acronym stood for anymore, but it was intentionally a kind of a social organization, but had some political stuff to it too. Intentionally for anyone who lived in my dorm, regardless of their race. I was one of the few white folks there, and I was welcomed without question. Where once I had fear about looking at race, now I had friends and a community. Had I not faced my fear about race, I would never have found that group of people. We never know what is in store for us when we face our fears head on. Sometimes our worst nightmares come true, but sometimes grace brings new life. May we dare to learn and grow when it comes to engaging in issues of race. May our leaders and all the leaders of the world overcome fear and find a mutual solution that avoids violence. And may peace and harmony rule the land. I love you. Go in peace, without fear. Amen. I invite you now to rise as you are willing and able, and join in singing hymn number 1028, The Fire of Commitment, from the thinner teal hymnal supplement, 1028.
Each week, we make an offering from the bounty we are blessed to enjoy. We do this in a spirit of love and generosity, aware that we have benefited from those who've gone before, those who, in their turn, gave generously. Our offering goes to support the work of love and justice undertaken by this community. Today's offering will also be shared with Ossining for Refugees. Please refer to our e-newsletter or website for more information. You can make your donation in several ways. If present in the sanctuary, you may give cash or check in the offering plate as it comes by. You can also scan the QR code in your order of service. From your homes, you can make your donation via credit card or PayPal using the links provided in the e-newsletter. Please remember to give a little extra to compensate for the 3% surcharge. Or, if you prefer, you can always mail us a check. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me in the dedication of the offering. The words are in your order of service. May these gifts and the work of our hands and hearts give power to all we stand for as a community of faith. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice. The words are found in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
May the meditation of our hearts, may the hymns of our spirit, may the wisdom of our thoughts, may the joy of our worship nurture us in the week ahead so that we may live our lives with dignity, love, and courage.